Hello everybody, it's Professor Rich, and finally we have a new video. It hasn't been too long, only 2 years, but here I am to talk about vocabulary note-taking. So I have a few questions for you to start, and those questions are: do you have a notebook only for vocabulary? Because if you don't, maybe you should. What information do you write when you note new vocabulary? So do you write the word and a translation, or the word and a definition, or just the word? What do you actually write down when you make a note of new vocabulary? And do you write it in your vocabulary notebook? Or do you write it on a scrap of paper? And my other question for you is, do you ever look at your notes again? So here's those questions on the screen, and I'd like you to consider your answer to those questions just for a minute. And you can pause the video and then restart it. So the next thing to consider is, what vocabulary are you gonna note down? And probably you're not going to note down every piece of new vocabulary that you see or hear. So the first thing you want to consider is how common or frequent this word or phrase is. And you probably want to learn the more common and frequent words and phrases first. The next thing you want to consider is your specific situation. Do you have any special requirements about the vocabulary you're learning? For example, if you're a medical student studying to be a doctor, then perhaps there's certain medical words and phrases that you are interested in noting down. The third thing that I think you should consider is if you like the word or phrase, because there's just some words or new vocabulary you see, and for some reason you like them. And if that's the case, it's probably a nice thing to note down, because it's probably going to be something that you use. Okay, so now we've talked about all that. Let's talk about what you can actually note down in terms of new vocabulary. So just think about the notes that you make for new vocabulary, and what information do you note down, and what else could you note down? Just pause the video for a minute, think about it, and make a list like the word, definition. What else could you note down? Okay, so maybe you have a list of things now. I'm kind of interested how many things are on your list. On my list here, there are 16 things, which when I first thought about it, I thought was a lot more than I was expecting. So here's the list of things. You can see we have the written word. There's the word class. Now the word class is like noun, verb, adjective. Then we have definition. The sounds, the phonology, which you can also get from online dictionaries or Google. The stress, which is the strongly pronounced part of the word, like in computer, then the stress is on pew, computer. Then we have translation, which might be a little controversial, but personally I think that can be useful. to note down the translation of a word or phrase in your own language or in your first language. Then we have collocations, and collocations are words that frequently go with that word. So I always give the example of range, and we have the collocation a wide range. So we don't say a great range or a big range, we say a wide range of things, which means like a large selection. For some reason we say wide range, and that's a collocation because those words go together frequently. Then we have examples in use. Now you can get those from the internet or a dictionary, or if you're a bit more confident with this vocabulary, then you could write the examples yourself. However, there is some danger in that you might get the use wrong because you're not yet confident enough to use the new word or phrase correctly. We have formality next, which is it formal? Is it colloquial? Is it neutral? That could be important. We have connotation. So connotation is like the extra feeling that a word gives aside from its meaning or definition. So, for example, with connotation, we could have the word thin, which doesn't really have a connotation, it's just neutral. But then we've got slim, which has a positive connotation, but means thin. And then we also could have like bony, which is basically means thin, but it has a negative connotation. So sometimes connotation can be quite important. Then we've got synonyms, which I think can be very useful to note down because they can help you sort of categorize the word and remember the meaning. Synonyms are other words with a very similar meaning, not the exact same meaning, but a very similar meaning. And then we've got antonyms, which are words with an opposite meaning, not necessarily as opposite as good and bad, but you could, for example, have something like give and take as antonyms, and that can be quite useful. You have like borrow and lend. Then you've got the word family, which is like other words you can form from this word. So if we had a word like study, then another word from that could be student. You could have studying, you could have studied. So it's kind of, you could think it's other forms of this word or types of this word that can be used in another way grammatically. Then we've got similar thematic words that can be helpful for some people because it's kind of similar to how the brain works, that it thinks thematically, it thinks in terms of classifications. So if you're learning like animals or something, and you write down a list of words that are related to this animal, then it can help you to remember that word and also the other thematic words that you note down. Then we have a diagram or picture. I think it's always kind of cool to draw a picture if you can, or if it helps you to remember something. For example, for something like on top of, my mobile phone's on top of the table, you could make a note of on top of as a phrase, and then you could draw a picture of a simple table with an X on it to help you remember what that means. And then finally, we've got the history of the word. Some people like that. Some people find it helps, but it is probably a little academic for most people. So those are the things I thought of, and you're probably still thinking, well, what does all that mean? And am I really going to use all of those? First, let me show you some examples of using them. So here we've got the word teacher, which probably you already know. Obviously, I've got the spelling there. You can see I've underlined teach, which is the word stress. I have an N next to teacher, which is the word class. Then I have a translation in Japanese, which I believe is sensei. Although, honestly, I got that translation off the internet because I don't know Japanese. Then we've got the phonemics. If you don't know phonemics, I think it's a great idea to learn them. If you don't want to learn them, that's okay too. And you can see it there, teacher. You can see also I've put the word stress again in the phonemics. Then underneath that I have neutral and positive. So neutral is the formality, that teacher is not a formal or informal word. And then I've got positive because the word teacher has a positive connotation in society. When someone says teacher, they think of it in quite a positive way, normally, I think. Then I have a list of synonyms, educator, tutor, instructor. I have a list of antonyms, student, learner, pupil. You can see that sometimes the idea of these being opposite is not as obvious as it seems. Then I have the definition, obviously, and we have some collocations, a school teacher, a good teacher, a bad teacher, teacher talk. Teacher talk is a term that teachers use to refer to how much the teacher talks in a language classroom. And the reason why we have a term for that is because normally in language teaching, we try to reduce that as much as possible so that it's the students doing more talking and the teacher doing less talking. Then I've got two examples in use. And then I have the word family, teachers, teach, teaching, and taught. I have some thematic words. And finally, I have the word history. Okay, so that's an example of a word with a great deal of information about it. Oh, and I have a little diagram as well. You can see the little picture there of a teacher. Okay, and we can also look at a phrase. So here we've got, I don't really agree with, a phrase. Like, I don't really agree with that. I don't really agree with you. I don't really agree with this proposal. You can see I've put the translation in Spanish. Realmente no estoy de acuerdo con whatever. And then we've got the phonemics. And basically the other things that I had on my example for teacher. Also, I've got a little diagram there as well. That symbol for me is a pretty good representation of disagreement. Okay, so they're my examples. And you're probably already thinking, well, there's no way I'm going to note down 10 or 12 things about every new piece of vocabulary I see. And you're right, you're not. And that would be crazy or a little too much anyway. So I'm going to give you a task. Now that you have your vocabulary notebook, you can go out and I'd like you to find 3 new words or phrases, and I'd like you to choose 3 things from our list that you do not normally note when you note new vocabulary. So choose 3 things, like, for example, synonyms, examples in use, and collocations, and then go and find 3 new pieces of vocabulary and make vocabulary notes about those things and use the new information and put those in your notes. All right? And then let me know in the comments below if that helps you to remember and use that new vocabulary. In order to help you a little bit more, I'm going to show you a few examples from my students when I did this. So I did this in Spain 2 years ago, and you can see that the students responded pretty well. And I think that their examples here are great and so much better than the notes that they had before, which were just like one word and maybe the translation like written on the edge of the course book or on a little piece of paper. And then after we did this, they all had little vocabulary notebooks and they were taking these great notes. So there you go. You can see those examples, and that is more or less what you're looking for. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. Please like the video or dislike the video, share the video or whatever, leave a comment. I am taking suggestions. I hope you liked it. Thank you very much for watching, and catch you later.